Catherine will speak on my behalf. Mrs. Meghan Markle has repeatedly written to the palace seeking our intervention in the Epstein matter, but, like Andrew, she must face her own consequences.
The palace did not whisper this time. It answered, and in that answer, every private hope Isabel had carried back toward the crown was crushed in a single devastating decision. King Alaric rejected her final plea for renewed royal access, and the palace confirmed the door was closed. Not delayed. Not reconsidered. Closed. Behind that word stood years of pain, silence, pride, and one king who finally refused to bend. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal house of Valand, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Isabel felt the answer before anyone explained it. She sat beside her phone, reading the palace response once, then again, as if a softer meaning might appear between the lines. It did not. The request pushed through channels had been denied. The Palace of Ashworth, the monarch's working headquarters where decisions are issued publicly, confirmed Isabel would not be restored to any formal family role. That mattered because this was not a social snub. This was the institution saying she had no official path back. It mattered more because the plea had not been casual. For weeks, her representatives had exchanged messages with aides, searching for limited access, controlled invitations, and one sign that the freeze was ending. King Alaric carried the file like a burden, not a weapon. The king read the final request inside his private study, where silence made every word heavier. He understood that rejecting Isabel would wound his youngest son, Prince Edmund, too, and that truth made the decision colder, not easier. Yet the monarch knew the crown could not survive on emotion alone. Royal access, meaning the right to attend protected family events and communicate through palace channels, had become too dangerous to reopen. Alaric set the file down, tired, because this was not triumph. It was admission. Something had broken, and the king no longer believed words could mend it. His eldest son, Crown Prince Frederick's shadow rested over the decision before the ink settled. A sealed note attached to the file suggested the prince had been consulted, and that detail changed the atmosphere. Frederick did not need to raise his voice to shape the outcome. His concern was already inside the wording. The confirmation used firm language, and aides understood at once that this was not a pause, not a cooling period, not a door left open. It was a permanent line. Before the palace could control the shock, one question began moving through the corridors. What exactly had Isabel asked for that made Alaric close the door so completely? And to understand why this rejection cut so deeply, the story must move from the palace statement to the people whose lives were trapped inside it. This was never just about access. It was about pride, memory, betrayal, and the unbearable weight of being told that a family door no longer opens. Isabel stood on one side of the divide, still believing there was one final sentence that could change everything. Alaric stood on the other, carrying the burden of kingship, and Frederick waited in silence, knowing one wrong concession could reopen every wound. Isabel read the palace reply twice, and the second reading hurt more than the first. She had not asked to return as a full working royal, meaning a senior family member expected to carry out official duties on behalf of the crown. She had asked for something smaller but emotionally larger. Selected family moments, controlled appearances, and a sign that she was no longer frozen out. That mattered because public exclusion had become part of her story. It also mattered because every closed invitation reminded the world that the split was not healed, only managed. Alaric felt the weight differently. The king wanted to be seen as a father who could forgive. But the monarch also had to protect the institution, meaning the system of royal duties, public trust, and palace order that survives beyond one family argument. He told a senior aide in a private documented account that the rejection was painful because it pushed Edmund further away. Alaric did not say it with anger. He said it with the tired voice of a man who knew the crown sometimes demanded a sacrifice from the heart before it asked anything from the hand. Frederick's role became harder to ignore once aides compared the final wording with remarks the prince had made in an earlier private meeting. The language was calm, but the meaning was firm. Isabel's return, even in a limited way, could reopen old wounds for Frederick's wife, Princess Lorena, unsettle the children, and pull the monarchy back into a storm it had barely survived. Frederick had watched the family suffer through accusation, silence, and public pressure. He did not want revenge. He wanted a boundary. And Alaric, reading the same fear in his son's careful words, understood why the future king would not move. Lorena supported the rejection quietly, but the princess feared what might come after it. She knew Isabel could turn silence into a weapon if the closed door became a public battle. Lorena had survived enough royal storms to recognize the danger in a wounded person with nothing left to lose. Isabel, meanwhile, stared at the reply with disbelief fading into stillness, as if the last illusion of return had been taken from her hands. The palace had not only refused her plea, it had removed the hope behind it. Yet the real reason behind Alaric's refusal did not begin with Isabel's final message. It began with one earlier incident that changed the palace's patience into suspicion. Because long before Alaric rejected the plea, one private royal moment had already made forgiveness feel impossible. Every royal rupture has a moment everyone later remembers differently, but no one forgets. For Isabel and the palace, that moment came during a private remembrance reception at Ashworth Hall when a quiet conversation turned sharp. An aide stepped away pale, and Frederick's expression changed in front of everyone. From that night forward, the question was no longer whether Isabel could return. It was whether the family would ever trust her again. Isabel felt the exclusion before anyone explained it. She had been left out of a family-only balcony appearance, meaning a public moment where selected members of the royal family stand together above the crowd as a sign of unity. That mattered because a balcony place was never just a place to stand. It was a message. It told the public who belonged inside the royal circle and who had been pushed beyond it. Isabel saw that absence as deliberate, and the hurt hardened quickly into anger. She challenged palace aides after the remembrance reception, demanding to know why she had been removed from a moment she believed still touched her family. Frederick watched the exchange become something darker. The prince had already carried years of public tension, but this moment felt different because it happened after a solemn ceremony, when restraint was expected and grief still hung over the family. He heard Isabel press the aides, and he saw one of them step away pale, shaken by the force of the confrontation. Frederick did not see a woman asking for fairness. He saw proof that image, position, and control still sat dangerously close to every royal wound. Isabel felt humiliated, but he felt alarmed. And that difference became the crack neither side could cross. Alaric saw it from across the room, and his face changed before he spoke. The king understood what a remembrance reception meant, a private gathering after a public ceremony where the family honors loss, duty, and shared history away from the cameras. That was why the timing mattered so much. The monarch had hoped grief might soften old bitterness. Instead, he watched resentment rise in the very place meant to quiet it. A palace aide later placed a written account of the incident into a confidential file, meaning a restricted record prepared for senior royal review. The account did not soften the moment. It preserved it. It described Isabel's sentence clearly. "You cannot erase me and expect silence." Those words unsettled the household because they sounded less like pain and more like warning. Isabel may have meant them as self-defense, but the palace heard danger. That line followed the file all the way to Alaric's desk. And when the king read it again, the confrontation everyone feared became unavoidable. So when Isabel's final plea reached the monarch, it carried not just words of return. It carried the echo of the night that changed everything. The confrontation did not happen before cameras. It happened behind closed doors, where every breath mattered and every pause sounded like judgment. Alaric sat at the head of the room, Isabel's request placed before him, while Frederick stood near the window, silent but immovable. No speeches, no ceremony, just a king, a future king, and the final question no one could soften. Should Isabel be allowed back in? Alaric knew every person in that room understood the weight of what was coming. William stayed quiet until the wording became the battle. The prince heard Alaric hesitate over the word rejected, and he understood why his father hated it. The word was cruel. It sounded final. It left no soft landing. But Frederick also knew that softer language would create false hope, and false hope had already cost the family too much. He reminded the king that Lorena had carried years of pressure without turning private pain into public war. He reminded him that the children had been dragged into storms they never chose. Frederick's anger did not explode. It settled low in his voice, controlled and unmistakable. Alaric removed his glasses, and the room changed. The monarch pressed his fingers to the page as if the paper itself had become too heavy to hold. He did not look victorious. He looked wounded. Isabel's plea had reached him as a request for return. But to the king it also carried the memory of every accusation, every silence, every broken attempt at peace. Alaric finally looked down at the file and said, "Then we close it." An aide moved before anyone else spoke, sliding forward a draft palace statement already prepared. That quiet gesture told the room something chilling. Someone had expected Alaric to reach this decision before the king said it aloud. The statement was not emotional. It was sharp, controlled, and built to end discussion. Isabel would not be named with cruelty, but she would be denied with certainty. Power inside the monarchy rarely announces itself. It moves through tone, timing, and the silence of people who already know the outcome. Alaric signed the decision, but Frederick's influence hung over every line. Isabel received the final palace response through a private channel before the public confirmation appeared. The reply made clear that future royal attendance, internal palace contact, and symbolic restoration were all denied. Isabel gripped the edge of the table as she read. She did not cry at first. That was what made the moment heavier. Edmund watched her reaction and understood the damage before she spoke. He asked whether there was still someone he could call, his father, a senior aide, anyone who might soften the blow. Isabel did not answer at once, and that silence told him the truth. The turning point came not with a palace statement, but with a private phone call between Alaric and Isabel. No aides, no advisors, just the two of them, separated by years of accusation and expectation. It was not a negotiation. It was not a reconciliation. It was the final courtesy before the door stayed closed. Alaric told her he could not rebuild trust by announcement. Isabel absorbed his words with controlled grief, not open rage. Alaric told her, "This is not punishment. It is protection." She did not beg again. She simply said she understood what the family had chosen. By morning, the private rejection had become a public headline, debated across the kingdom of Valand. The story no longer belonged to Alaric or Isabel. It belonged to the nation, watching a royal door close in real time. In the end, the palace did not merely reject a plea. It chose an identity. Alaric chose the crown over another round of fragile compromise. Frederick chose protection over sentiment. Isabel faced the end of a hope she had not fully admitted she still carried. And Edmund was left standing between love and lineage, knowing the door had closed with a sound no one in the family could pretend not to hear. The door was closed, and this time, everyone heard it.